Well, thanks everybody. Thank you so much for hosting this event today, and we're really happy to be talking about some important topics. So, Bill, one thing that I think many of you, if they haven't looked up your background or know much about you, you've got a pretty extensive background in traditional capital markets and as a former executive of an actual bank. So, what initially attracted you to Polymesh and its vision?
Well, I've been definitely blessed over the last 30 plus years. So I actually got my start in commercial banking. You know, you're old when these institutions are no longer around. So Bank of Boston back in 1987, bought by Fleet, now part of Bank of America. So specifically started middle market lending. It was an interesting time in 1987, Black Monday, for those of us who remember, and the S&L crisis. I was later moved over to work out. And, you know, certainly that gave me a better appreciation of, you know, KYC, KYB, BSA, AML, and certainly UCC filings for secure assets within the middle market. Spend the bulk of my career within global equity capital markets, so that's 20 plus years. Once again, with names that are not around anymore: Lehman Brothers, Prudential Securities, part of Prudential Insurance, in addition to Mizuho Securities USA, the second largest bank in Japan. And what was significant during that 20-year period within global equity capital markets is exposure to equities or public equities, in addition to public fixed income, whether it's IPOs, secondaries, or private placements, or as they say in capital markets, Rule 144A. After that 20-year span, this is where I got my exposure to Bitcoin. So back in 2015, there's something called a self-directed IRA account in the United States. So when you hear about Peter Thiel's $2.2 billion retirement account, it's in a self-directed IRA account. So why do I mention that? I happen to work for the largest custodian that focused on the custody of alternative assets. The name of that custodian was Pensko Trust, later bought by Opus Bank, Irvine, California, and then later bought by Pacific Premier Bank. And so back then, you could or we could custody Bitcoin, but only in a fund form. So that back then in 2015, that meant Grayscale, Patera Capital, it was their token fund, in addition to Bitwise. And what's interesting, because Pensko Trust is located in the West Coast, is Bitco. So that's when Mike Belchi, kind of 2013, 2014, started Bitco, qualified custodian, focused on the custody of individual tokens, whereas for Pensko Trust or Pacific Premier Trust, it was only in a fund form. From there, it was back to commercial banking. Bank Prov, the Provident Bank of Massachusetts, a 200-year-old community bank that was providing depository services to digital asset firms. So think about Silvergate, Signature, Customers Bank, Cross River, and then there was Bank Prov. Basically there for a cup of coffee, 9 or 10 months, crypto winter set in. The board of directors, the community was like, why are we providing depository services to digital asset firms? And by the way, we do equipment financing to Bitcoin miners, in which the whole entire portfolio blew up. But it was a great learning experience, which led me to Puerto Rico. So I became a CEO of an offshore bank called Arrival Bank in Puerto Rico, which was digital asset friendly. And it was really that experience that enabled me to really get this job at Polymesh. So kind of similar, a 3-4-year-old startup, original co-founders, they were kind of tripping over each other a little bit, and they needed to bring in someone with no hair, gray hair, who could kind of be a father figure to a bunch of 30 and 40-year-olds and we were able to scale deposits up by 300% in a year and a half. Now, granted, crypto winter kind of got a little bit better. And then our transactional volume was 3x. So with that experience, ended up joining Polymesh mainly because of all this wonderful experience, commercial banking, capital markets, custody, and then being able to ramp up a rival bank is very similar as it relates to Polymesh. So Polymesh been around since 1920, 1920,
2021.
yeah, 2021. Thank you very much. And so, there was a little bit of lag there. And so a similar situation, and Nick has been a huge help. And we started this in the fourth quarter, aggressively building out our ecosystem. So, it's tough to ask somebody to put assets on chain. If you don't have a custodian, you can't settle, you don't have on and off ramps, payment rails, stablecoin providers, wallets, and the list goes on and on. And so we've made some great announcements over the past several months. BitCo, we are their RWA chain, and of course, Zodia is also our RWA chain. We are their RWA chain. And of course, the significance with Zodia is owned by Standard Chartered Bank, a top 30 global commercial bank. So, Nick, a little bit long-winded, but you take all that experience, and it certainly, gives me the confidence, and it gives you guys the confidence to have confidence in me to take this thing to the next step.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something that's been pretty apparent. For those of you who don't know, Bill has been traveling all over the world. We marvel at his ability to get to various different places. In fact, you've been at over 4 different continents in the past 6 months. And so one thing that I was curious about is, based on all of that sort of experience, and I know you've had some experience previously too, working in different parts of the world. What have, specifically over the last 6 months, what are the sort of themes that you're hearing from those various, stops along the way? What are some things that are maybe different? But more importantly, I think, is there an overarching theme that is coming across that's, every single regulator all over the world, they're kind of saying the same thing on what they're looking for?
Yeah, great, great question. Top of mind. Look, at the DeFi guys are not going to like this, but and Nick has been talking about this for several months. Reg DeFi, so it is about regulation. It's about smart regulation, and so you got to balance innovation with regulation. So as Nick knows, on Monday I was in Washington D.C. at the SEC Crypto Task Force Roundtable. Talking about tokenization. I wasn't a panelist. I was there listening in. I did attend one other panel a couple of months ago, and it was quite apparent that the SEC wants to promote innovation, but in a quote unquote compliant environment. And I think the way that they look at blockchain, or let's just say digital, I hate the word crypto, by the way, digital assets in general, they look at it almost like a wrapper, like an ETF almost. And so if you take a digital asset and you're wrapping it, you still have to adhere, at least here in the United States, to the regulatory framework for any other security. Now, we can debate whether all tokens are, utility versus a security. We might get to a point where they're considered all securities. But the point is whether it's here in the United States, Hong Kong, Singapore, obviously the UAE has been at the forefront of really promoting smart regulation at the same time that they allow, innovation to flourish. The UAE or the Middle East in general have one advantage. We've had a framework in the United States and probably in Canada for 100 years. So that's the foundation that we have to work off of versus, let's say, the UAE, in which they're basically starting by scratch. in building something new. So the central theme, at least over the last several months, has been, regulation, 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 but smart regulation.
Yeah, I can totally see that. I think, even recently, I believe on Monday, somebody tweeted out that they were actually talking about permissions change right at the SEC or roundtable.
Well, actually, that's a great point.
Right.
Look, I'm not going to get into the debate, the intellectual debate of permissionless versus permission. Maybe at some point, permissionless wins 10 years from now. I don't know. But right now, as it relates to global financial institutions, they don't feel comfortable with permissionless. It's some sort of public permission, and of course, that's a shout out to us, right? We do have a separate instance called Polymesh Private, in which financial institutions can spin up their own captive blockchain, similar to J.P. Morgan and Citi.
Right. And I think, that's an interesting sort of segue to my next question, which is, how Polymesh attempts to, or I think in our case, we think that it does solve those challenges that are being mentioned by regulators. So what's been the response when you're able to talk with some of those folks and about how we, in fact, do solve those challenges that you're hearing?
Yeah, it's interesting. Senator Warren, who's my senator from Massachusetts, obviously responsible for some of the damage that was done within crypto in general, specifically the SEC, and then really being blamed for choke point, 2.0. The reason why I bring her up is because myself, two of our colleagues actually met with Senator Warren right before Christmas. And what was interesting is they actually kind of sat up a little bit straighter as it relates to a public permission blockchain versus a permissionless blockchain. And they were totally intrigued. And I ended up using not necessarily our use cases, but I use, for example, I think it was Solana who partnered with the UN specifically around refugee payments. So if you ever been to or have seen a refugee camp, um, whether it's a building or a tent, it's a charging station. They all have phones. And of course, one of the issues is, monies that go to the UN eventually go to an NGO, which goes to another NGO, which goes to another NGO. So basically, the refugee ends up getting maybe 50 cents on the dollar or 75% or 75% on the dollar. And in that particular use case, because they had their phones and they were able to download a wallet, the UN through Solana was able to get those payments to them directly, and they could use it for food or rent or transportation versus the old way. And they, believe it or not, they weren't aware of that particular use case. The other one is, and maybe it's the New Englander in me, I'm a little bit cynical. So my brother served 20 years U.S. Army and Apache pilot. So Germany, South Korea twice, Bosnia, Kosovo, Iraq, and Afghanistan. He had retired, was running a dedicated helicopter program in Al Ain, which is outside of Dubai, training Afghan pilots how to fly helicopters. Then they would go back to Afghanistan. Fast forward, Biden administration pulls out. All these pilots get stuck. Some are in the UAE, some are in Uzbekistan, some of them are in Kabul. They're in desperate need of money. So my brother, believe it or not, is sending money via MoneyGram and Western Union. So $100, they're only getting $75 of it. I don't know, that pisses me off, right? There's whether it's Ripple and cross-border payments and so that's really, as someone who's a little bit older, I get excited because I look at MoneyGram and I look at Western Union. It's just a money grab, no pun intended. And these are the types of real world uses that are out there.
And so I think, payments is a really good example. Remittances are great examples that really make it easy for folks to understand, the benefits of blockchain, right? It's something that you can see. Most people know if you were traveled, or I'm actually a little bit older than I look. I remember having traveler's checks.
You do look young.
But yeah, my folks would have traveler's checks, right? Like, all of those problems, I think, a lot of the use cases out there today are really illustrative in solving. And they're good examples because it helps people stay grounded. So, what I'm curious though is, a lot of the intricacies when it comes to capital markets are completely invisible to folks, right? I think, things like Robinhood and others have done a really great job extracting a lot of the complexity from, hey, I just want to buy some shares in Tesla, click a couple buttons, boom. So I'm curious to know, like, from your experience, what are the obstacles that institutions face when integrating with this technology, and sort of what are some of the, advantages that allow these capital markets participants to plug into Polymesh and be able to solve those?
So with my fan club right here, we kind of talked about this earlier. Um, so roughly around 75% of all ACHs in the United States go through two banks, JP Morgan and Wells Fargo. So how do you break it? You know, institutionally, it's really really tough. Now, J.P. Morgan with the JP coin i- is 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 starting to do that, but it's only for their captive clients, and it's only for their Fortune 500 clients who need to move 50 million or 100 million instantaneously to go pay for supplies in a different country. So that's very specific to the J.P. Morgan. As CEO of a rival bank, and we were, a startup growth bank, obviously highly regulated. So Puerto Rico, U.S. territory. They have their own regulator, but overseen by the New York Federal Reserve. Literally every 6 months, the Ripple team is visiting me and, hey, cross-border payments, and you guys are, you do global SMEs for a USD account. This is perfect. This is great. And my response is I would agree with you. It would be a great experience for my customers to get their money within seconds. And I'm making it up. I don't know how much it would cost, 5 cents, 25 cents, maybe it's $1.50. But my problem is 30% of my revenue is coming from non-interest income. That's coming from transactional fees, domestic wires, international wires, and ACH. I can't scale fast enough at $1.50 to offset my wire business at $25 or $35 or $45. So we're at this crossroads, and I know there's plenty of use cases and baby steps, but in my case at a rival bank, I'd love to do it. And they had their own money transfer license, and they were able to do it in Puerto Rico. But how do I offset that? Um, and the only way I can offset is, I need to scale with 10 million customers versus the small SMEs of 400 of them.
Yeah.
So the answer to the question is it's tough. I think where it's going to come from is these neobanks that really don't have the the legacy back office, and then there's a whole generational change that is going on. So
Great. And I know we're a little tight for time here, so I think we're going to have our last question here. So from your perspective, then, what is it about Polymesh that does try to make it easier? Like we've got our permission, compliance, identity. It sounds like regulation is important. Knowing who your counterparties are important. What do you think the message is to those institutions that makes it easy for them to want to be able to work with us in a regulated setting?
um, yeah, so timing is everything. So for Polymesh, we're just in a great spot right now, being a public permission chain in which the SEC, which is crypto or digital asset friendly, is still saying um, that digital assets in general have to operate in a wrapper with the same framework as public securities, whether they're equities or fixed income. And so, for Polymesh, I need to see a passport. And so 99.9999% of the bad actors are not going to show up, which is a good thing. And then our node operators have to be licensed. So yeah, we're going to do a background check on the node operators, but if they have a virtual license out of Dubai, or they got some sort of state chartered license or a broker dealer license, obviously they have to go through that whole process to get the licenses. So it really gives institutions in general, whether they're banks, asset managers, and other global financial services companies, a sense of security that that whoever is on our chain has already been vetted. And of course, we have the separate instance, Polymesh Private. So it's really built for the global financial institution. And I think for now, being public permission, we're kind of in the sweet spot.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. All right. Well, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Moving on to the next one.
VIP.